what about the relationship between cortisol and burnout? You talked about sustained, chronically elevated cortisol, but I've also heard you talk about burnout is basically being wrongly timed cortisol over time.
That's
sort
right.
of stretched out. What have you come to learn about handling burnout? Somebody feels that sense, or I feel like I'm sort of close to that. What's going on, and how can they try to intervene in that?
So there seem to be two general forms of burnout. One is I'm exhausted in the morning and I just can't get into gear. And then it's like caffeine, exhausted. And then late day, okay, finally, I caught the wave front, and then I'm having trouble sleeping, and then the whole thing repeats.
Wired but tired.
Wired but tired. The other form of burnout is where people it's like their cortisol is like a square wave function. It's just up in the morning and all day long. It's sort of how I would describe my graduate school years, probably undergraduate, graduate school years, postdoc. I think I hit a wall during my postdoc years. So that was, that would be, 30 or 35. And then at some point you realize you just can't keep this going. And I think most entrepreneurs feel that way. At some point, you're just like, I can't do this. I mean, even the David Goggins and the Cam Haineses, they do sleep, right? They get sleep eventually. So I think the main way to think about burnout and exhaustion is to ask oneself, okay, if I had total control, when would I naturally wake up? When would I naturally go to sleep? Like, what would be my preferred times to do that? And then whatever your wake up time is, to really treat that first 3 to 6 hours of your day as go time, and to do the things, bright light, hydration, exercise, caffeine, et cetera, that really push you into the day. But then really essentially doing all the opposite things that you do in the morning in the last, ideally 4, but most people won't do that, last 2 hours of your day. Dim the lights, caffeine, forget it. You should have halted that probably 8 hours before sleep. Limit your hydration, right? Unless you're dehydrated, limit your hydration. Long exhale breathing, anything that can bring your cortisol levels down and bring your melatonin levels up, which is why we're so bullish about dimming the lights later in the day. And, we were talking about the red lens glasses to block out short wavelength light, which, by the way, a lot of people have said, well, the study is showing that screen light disrupts sleep. Very variable between people. People have different levels of retinal sensitivity. So how much screen light will disrupt their sleep. But it's not just about sleep. There's a beautiful study published in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences that showed that people who sleep in a room with an overhead light of 100 lux, which is extremely dim, show abnormally elevated morning glucose levels. Makes perfect sense. Cortisol mobilizes glucose, and this is through closed eyelids. Okay, so you have to get the light down to maybe 1 to 3 lux. And you say 1 to 3 lux, it's basically dark. A candle light is very low. A bright full moon, where you say, oh, it's so bright out, is actually only about 1 to 5 lux. So we think of these sources as very bright, but nature set us up to have bright mornings and dim, dark nights. And some people will say, well, there's no light where I live. Listen, you don't need to see the sun as a delineated object. If you compare how bright it is, let's just say even in the dead of winter in the UK at 9 a.m., walking in a place with no artificial lighting outside, no street lamps, versus midnight the night before in the same location, you'd say you can navigate in the one case without any artificial lighting, without what we call flashlight, you call a torch. But in any case, the idea is that there are a lot of photons coming through, and you want all of that early in the day, and you just want to do the inverse in the last part of the day. So I think to avoid overwhelming people, because people have so much to do and think about, get the first hour of your day right. Get the last hour of your day right, and you'll greatly improve this morning cortisol peak, late day cortisol reduction, which is what you want. And you'll get your natural clearing out of any melatonin that happens to be in your system, because bright light quashes melatonin through a different pathway, but that also originates with the eyes, goes through the suprachiasmatic nucleus and a couple other relays to your pineal, shuts down melatonin production. And then late in the day, you just make it dimmer, darker, and you bring up your melatonin, you bring down your cortisol. But if you think about what's happened with screens, it's stimulating. I think late last night, I made the mistake I watched an extended 60 Minutes interview. I actually fell asleep to it.
Is it the Peter Attia one?
No, it's the Trump one.
Okay.
I was curious. I hadn't heard an interview with him for a long time, and it was sort of combative, but it was an interesting one, and I was curious to see how that would go. And I fell asleep in about the last 15 minutes, but I wouldn't recommend doing that. Normally, it would be screens off in the last hour. I just, I got a little loose with my protocols.
Yeah, I've seen you talking about daylight savings, time changes, and stuff like that. this has been nearly a decade now since Matthew Walker was first on Rogan. I think it was nearly almost 10 years ago. And I was still a club promoter at the time. And up until then, I just assumed that sleep it's just like this thing that got in the way of me working. It was just this bullshit. And honestly,
when you're 20s, that's kind of true.
You're made of rubber and magic, dude. You know what I mean? Caffeine and big dreams and sellotape and cable ties. You just fucking like strung together with this stuff. Anyway, he came on and basically did the scare them straight equivalent. Do you ever have that in school? Scare them straight?
No.
So they bring a prison officer in and he tells you about how horrible life is in prison and all of the horror stories.
How old are you?
Like 12, 13.
Oh, yeah, that was scary.
Yeah. And he's saying, they put boiling water into a cup and mix loads of sugar in it and it's syrup and they throw it on people and then they have batteries and they put them in socks. And I remember he hit this sock filled with batteries down on the table and it made me jump. And I was like, fuck, like I really don't want to go to... honestly, it worked. For me, my particular psychological makeup, that thing absolutely... I don't think I was the sort of person that was probably going to go to jail anyway. But yeah, I learn sleep is, okay, really, really important. You've been talking about daylight savings. The more that I learn about it, the effects of sleep deprivation are just terrifying. It's just everything gets broken.
Yeah. I mean, sleep is the ultimate reset. We could talk about some of the newer data that point to exactly why. I will say, just, for people's peace of mind, if you don't spike your cortisol for a couple days in a row, you get one poor night's sleep for a couple days in a row, you're going to be fine. The human body and brain evolved under conditions that were extreme, right? New parents will tell you how difficult sleep can be. I mean, you can pull it off. The thing that we call chronic stress is frankly when that cortisol curve gets disrupted in any number of ways, but typically it's late day cortisol spikes that don't come back down afterwards for 3, 4, 5 days in a row. Your hippocampus, this memory center in the brain, is chock-a-block full of cortisol receptors. And cortisol, unlike adrenaline, can pass through the blood-brain barrier. All right. So it has a number of docking sites that allow it to engage the memory system. With stress will engage your memory system, but that over time will start to deteriorate these structures. So if somebody hasn't been sleeping well, I'm not just saying this to make them feel better. You don't want to send them into a panic. And all of these systems can be recovered. When Matt went on Rogan, I think it was an important, truly important.
It was fucking, I'll say it was seminal.
Yeah.
Like he has saved, that one episode has probably saved thousands of years, if not hundreds of thousands of years of combined human life.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. I mean, I think that the challenge, and I think that Matt would say this, I'm sort of borrowing his words, is that he sufficiently scared everybody. There were fewer things to offer to do to promote good sleep at that time. And there were more of a lot of here's what happens if you don't sleep.
Yeah, the stress of trying to be perfect will kill you more quickly than your imperfections. That over-optimize or obsessor thing.
And you want to give people a sense of real agency.
Hope.
Right? Yeah, dimming the lights if you're light sensitive in particular, and limiting caffeine. I mean, all the things that are sort of obvious to us now. The morning sunlight thing, I think most people don't tether to their sleep because it's not obvious how doing something in the first hour of your day to be more alert and spike cortisol creates a situation 14 hours later where you are a better sleeper. So over time, I mean, Matt's started to adopt that. I mean, I think he also pointed out the detriments of alcohol and cannabis on sleep, which I echo. I think also, if you think just back even 6 years, 7 years, we weren't aware of the number of over-the-counter compounds that can be helpful for sleep. People were still thinking about drugs, prescription drugs for sleep, which, have their place for certain people, but most people hadn't considered mag-threonate, theanine, chamomile. Now I would add to that saffron, tart cherry, we know can increase. Apigenin and chamomile extract, similar.
Lemon balm,
skullcap. It sounds kind of crazy, right? It sounds like we're behind the counter at some herb medicine shop, right?
Eye of newt and a fucking wizard tail.
Exactly. Right. I mean, I didn't come here to do an AGZ plug, but I've played around with a number of different non-supplement things for sleep over the years because I'm an experimenter in and out of the lab. And I mean, I can tell you a wild story from high school where the girl sitting behind me, I remember her name. It was Erin Crenard. Her mom had some tablets, some Chinese medicine tablets, and I took one. Because I was having some issues sleeping, and she gave me one, and I the whole night I was wide awake, hearing music blaring from behind my head. And I think I was in a pseudo sleep state.
Wow.
Thought I was awake. I was like, that's really scary. But I was like, wow, there are compounds that really work for sleep. And then, there are things like the peptide pinealin I experimented with a bit. Not a lot of human studies at all. Some interesting rodent studies may regenerate the pinealocytes in the pineal. It gives me like 2 hours a night of REM sleep. But I will say, having completely halted pinealin, I did a short run experiment with it. I will say that the formulation that's in AGZ has me sleeping with double the amount of REM sleep and at least a third more slow wave deep sleep every night. And I can only drink about 2/3 of that stuff before it's almost like too much, not because it's too much volume, but because any more in my dreams are just too elaborate. And what's magic about it, I think it's that it has a bunch of different things in it. So again, I didn't come here to plug AGZ, but I think that they really nailed it in the sense that in the last 10 years, the scientific community, the health and wellness community has really come to the conclusion that there are things that can nudge your sleep in the right direction. So just being told, like, if you don't sleep, you're going to die of dementia is scary. You want to give people agency.